Picture this. You are standing in the dust and the heat of a summer morning, somewhere in the ancient land between the Tigris and Euphrates, in the year 530 AD. The sun has barely cleared the horizon, and already it hammers down like something personal, like something that has decided to punish this particular patch of earth on this particular day. Behind you is a city, not a great metropolis like Constantinople or Ctesiphon, but a fortress, a statement in stone. Walls 5 feet thick rising from the Syrian soil, towers cutting into the hot blue sky, and beyond those walls, a Roman garrison that has been watching the eastern horizon with tightening dread for weeks. The city is called Dara, and in front of you, across the flat, on sun-baked ground that separates you from the Persian border, is the largest army that Persia has sent against Rome in a generation. They are organized. They are disciplined. They are veterans of conquest. They have 50,000 men, maybe more, arrayed in a formation that has crushed everything it has faced for the last 100 years. Horse archers in the thousands, the finest composite bows in the world, men who could put an arrow through a Roman shield from 150 yards at full gallop. Savaran cavalry, the armored noble riders, the Persian aristocracy on horseback, trained from birth to kill and to lead. War elephants, their gray hides painted with crimson and gold, their howdahs carrying archers who rain arrows down from above human height. And infantry beyond counting, is stretching across the plain in an unbroken line that seems to touch both horizons. Now look to your left, and look to your right, because you are not standing alone in that dust. You are standing with a Roman army of perhaps 25,000 men. You are outnumbered 2 to 1. The enemy has more cavalry, more elephants, more arrows, more experience, and an unbroken record of success against Roman armies in this region stretching back generations. Your commander is 25 years old. He has never won a major battle. He has, in fact, been part of a Roman force that has already suffered a catastrophic defeat at Persian hands just a year earlier, a humiliation so complete that the entire Roman Eastern Command was reorganized in its aftermath. And yet, by the end of this day, there's something is going to happen on this plain outside the walls of Dara that no one, no Persian general, no Byzantine emperor, no military analyst watching from the walls of Constantinople would have predicted. Something that changes the calculus of Roman-Persian power in an instant. Something that validates a plan so audacious, so counter to every conventional military instinct of the age, that even the man who designed it must have lain awake the night before, wondering whether he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. That young commander's name is Flavius Belisarius, and what he does at Dara is not just a battle. It is a revolution in tactical thinking, the moment when one of history's greatest military minds announces himself to the world with a result so decisive, so elegantly achieved, or that military historians are still studying it 15 centuries later. 15 centuries! That should tell you something about what we are about to walk through. If you love history that actually matters, history that is not just names and dates, but a story about human intelligence, courage, and genius, you are exactly where you should be. Hit subscribe, because this is what we do every single video. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Someone watching might be in a city that was once part of the Byzantine Empire. Someone might be in Tehran, the spiritual heir of the Sassanid civilization that marched toward Dara that morning. I read every comment, and I mean it. Now let's go back. Because to understand what Belisarius does at Dara, we need to understand the world that produced both him and the army standing across from him. We need to understand why, on that June morning, almost nobody gave Rome a chance. Here is what most people do not fully appreciate about the Roman-Persian conflict in the 6th century AD. This was not a border dispute. What was happening between Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, and Sassanid Persia in the early 6th century was a geopolitical confrontation of the highest stakes imaginable, a clash between the two most powerful, most sophisticated, most deeply organized civilizations on the face of the earth. The outcome would determine which version of the ancient world survived into the medieval period, and which did not. The Byzantine Empire in 530 AD was the direct continuation of the Roman Empire, not a successor state. In the same empire, same institutions, same legal traditions, same army, same imperial title, centered now on Constantinople rather than Rome, speaking Greek rather than Latin, worshipping the Christian God in the greatest churches humanity had ever built. Constantinople was the largest, wealthiest, most cosmopolitan city on earth. The solidus, the Byzantine gold coin, was the dollar of the ancient world, trusted from Britain to India without question. The Byzantines controlled the eastern Mediterranean coastline, the grain supply of Egypt, the western terminus of the Silk Road. Emperor Justinian I sat on the throne in 530 AD, one of the most consequential rulers in human history, a man of almost inhuman ambition who believed it was his divine mandate to restore the full Roman Empire to its ancient boundaries. When he slept 4 hours a night, he fasted to the edge of illness, he read every dispatch and made every major decision. He was brilliant, relentless, and utterly tireless. But Justinian had a problem. The largest of them, the one sitting closest and pressing hardest, was Persia. The Sassanid Persian Empire was everything Byzantium was, in a different key. Where Byzantium was Christian, Persia was Zoroastrian. Where Byzantium prided itself on its Roman inheritance, Persia traced its lineage back to Cyrus the Great, to Darius, to the Achaemenid kings who had once ruled from the Nile to the Indus. Ctesiphon, the Persian capital, was a city of staggering grandeur. The Tak Kasra, the great arch of the palace, rose 65 feet into the air, the largest single-span brick vault in human history. It still partially stands today. And Persia's army. The Sassanid military system was one of the most sophisticated killing machines the ancient world had ever produced. Horse archers, armored Savaran cavalry, war elephants, combined arms integration refined over generations. This combination had been eating Roman armies alive for the better part of a century. Here, in 530 AD, stood a 25-year-old Roman general with a dangerously outnumbered force, on ground that had historically favored the Persians, facing an enemy whose confidence bordered on contempt. The question wasn't just who would win this battle. The question was whether Byzantine civilization could generate the military intelligence to solve a problem that had broken so many of its predecessors. The answer was standing in the dust outside the walls of Dara, holding the reins of a horse, looking east. Alright, let that sink in. To understand how we get to Dara in 530 AD, we need to step back a generation. Because the Roman situation in the east in the years leading up to this battle is not just bad. It is systematically, institutionally, historically bad in ways that require explanation. Go back to the late 5th century. The Western Roman Empire has collapsed. 476 AD, the date you probably remember from school. The eastern half, what we call Byzantium, survives and adapts. But the psychological trauma of that collapse reshapes everything about how Constantinople thinks about its strategic position. The Byzantines in the late 5th and early 6th century are managing multiple existential threats simultaneously. Germanic kingdoms in the former western provinces, pressure from the Huns and their successor peoples on the Danube, new internal theological controversies that destabilized entire provinces, and, always, relentlessly, implacably, Persia. The wars of 502 to 506 AD were particularly damaging to Roman prestige. The Persians under Kavad I launched a massive invasion of the Roman East, sacking the great city of Amida, modern Diyarbakir in southeastern Turkey, after a 3-month siege. Amida's walls were legendary. Its garrison was experienced. Kavad's army took it anyway, systematically, professionally, with a siege capability that Roman commanders found deeply alarming. Anastasius eventually reclaimed Amida at enormous financial cost and spent the remaining years of his reign building the fortress city of Dara, a heavily fortified Byzantine military base positioned close to the Persian frontier. They're designed to serve as both a garrison point and a launching pad for offensive operations. It was the anchor of Byzantine eastern defense. But walls and fortresses are only as good as the armies that use them. And Byzantine armies in this theater had a persistent, structural problem: consistently terrible leadership. Anastasius died in 518 AD. He was followed by Justin I, an elderly soldier from the Balkans who, though personally tough, was not an administrator of Anastasius's caliber. Justin's great achievement was recognizing that his nephew Justinian was a genius and positioning him for succession. Justin died in 527 AD. Justinian came to power. Immediately, the Persian situation demanded attention. Kavad I was still on the throne, the same king who had sacked Amida, now old but still sharp, still ambitious. His son Khosrau, who would one day be called the Great, was already demonstrating the talent that would define his reign. The Sassanid war machine was running at full capacity. In 524 to 525 AD, Kavad began dismantling the fragile peace over Iberia, the Caucasian kingdom sitting between Persian and Byzantine spheres of influence. The Iberian king, increasingly uncomfortable under Persian religious pressure, appealed to Constantinople. Justinian responded. War resumed. In 528 AD, a Roman force was ambushed and destroyed near Thanuris and Minduos, frontier positions east of Dara. The Roman commander, a man named Belisarius, was part of this campaign. He was caught in the open, suffered a catastrophic defeat, and his force was routed. The attempt to push the frontier forward ended in humiliation. It was a disaster. And Belisarius, to his credit, did not respond the way incompetent commanders usually do, by blaming everyone else, by retreating into bureaucratic self-protection. He responded the way a genuine military mind responds to defeat. He learned from it. He spent the months after Thanuris thinking, analyzing, asking hard questions about why the Roman force had been beaten and what it would take to win the same kind of engagement against the same enemy on similar terrain. The answers he arrived at were not conventional. They were not safe. They were the kind of conclusions that can only be reached by someone willing to discard inherited assumptions entirely. When Kavad's army moved toward Dara in the summer of 530 AD, Belisarius was ready. Before we talk about Belisarius's plan, we need to spend time, serious time, with the army he was facing. Because if you don't understand why the Sassanid Persian military was so fundamentally formidable, you cannot understand the magnitude of what Belisarius achieved at Dara. You cannot appreciate the audacity of his solution if you don't first feel the weight of the problem. The Sassanid army that marched toward Dara in June of 530 AD was commanded by two senior Persian generals, Perazes, and alongside him, Barismanus. Both were experienced, politically connected officers of the Persian military aristocracy, men who had served for decades, who understood combined arms warfare at the highest level, who had read every Roman tactical manual and had more than enough experience facing Roman forces to know their patterns, their strengths, and, crucially, their weaknesses. They brought approximately 50,000 men. Some sources say more. The exact number is disputed. Ancient sources have a well-documented tendency to inflate enemy numbers. But even conservative modern estimates put the Persian force at roughly double Belisarius's 20 to 25,000. The numerical advantage alone, in the tactical context of 530 AD, was enormous. More men means more options. More men means more pressure on multiple points simultaneously. More men means you can absorb casualties and keep attacking while your enemy exhausts his reserves trying to hold the line. But numbers were only the beginning of what made this army terrifying. The cavalry. Let's start there, because in the Persian military system, cavalry was not a supporting arm. It was the decisive arm. The Persian nobles, the Savaran, were armored riders of tremendous individual skill. And these were men who had been on horseback since childhood, who had spent their adult lives in military service, who wore lamellar armor over their entire bodies, including face masks and gauntlets, who carried a combination of bow, lance, and sword that made them lethal at every range from 100 yards down to hand. They were the operational brain of the Persian army, capable of complex maneuvers, feigned retreats, controlled flanking movements, precision encirclements, executed with the kind of cohesion that comes only from decades of shared training and shared culture. Supporting the Savaran were the horse archers, lighter, faster, unarmored or lightly armored, carrying the most technically advanced bows in the ancient world. The Sassanid composite bow, constructed from layers of horn, wood, and sinew, be carefully laminated over months to create a weapon of extraordinary power in a compact, recurved form, could put an arrow through most Roman shields at 100 yards. A skilled Persian horse archer could fire perhaps a dozen aimed shots per minute from a galloping horse. Multiply that by thousands of archers, all trained from birth to ride and shoot simultaneously, and you have a weapons system that is simultaneously the most powerful area denial tool and the most effective harassment weapon of its age. No Roman soldier had an effective answer to massed arrow fire from horse archers they could not catch and could not make stand still long enough to close with. The infantry held ground, secured flanks, and acted as the anvil against which the cavalry hammer could drive broken Roman formations. Its war elephants served as elevated archery platforms. Archers in howdahs shooting down at angles Roman shields could not easily deflect, and their physical presence alone unnerved horses and infantry alike. What truly made this army terrifying was not any single element, but the system behind it. Logistics, supply trains, organizational infrastructure capable of sustaining 50,000 men in desert conditions for extended periods. When a Persian army arrived outside your walls, it was a professional force in good condition with enough supplies to conduct either a rapid assault or an extended siege. And psychologically, the Persian army in 530 AD was operating from profound confidence, bordering on contempt. They had been winning. For a generation, since the wars of Anastasius, since the fall of Amida, since the victory at Thanuris 2 years earlier, the pattern was clear. It was evidence of genuine structural military advantage. Roman commanders had tried different approaches and consistently come up short. When Perazes and Barismanas marched toward Dara, they knew all of this. They felt it in the posture of their men, in the rhythm of the march, in the casual confidence of veterans approaching a contest they expect to win. They had a plan. A good plan. The kind that wins battles. They had a plan. It was a good plan. It was the kind of plan that wins battles. It just didn't account for Belisarius. Think about that. 50,000 experienced professional soldiers, veteran commanders, the most sophisticated combined arms military system in the ancient world, and they were walking toward a trap. They just didn't know it yet. Imagine standing in their cavalry line that morning. The confidence, the familiar weight of armor on your shoulders, the smell of horses and dust and the dry desert air, the distant walls of Dara shimmering in the heat. No idea. Now let's talk about Belisarius. He was born sometime around 500 AD in Germania, a small town in Thrace, the Balkans region that is modern-day Bulgaria. Not a noble family, not the kind of aristocratic lineage that typically produced senior military commanders in the Byzantine system. He rose through the ranks by competence, which is, in any era, the harder and more impressive path. He entered military service as a member of the bodyguard of Justinian himself, when Justinian was still the emperor's nephew and the power behind the throne. This proximity to power was important. But let's not reduce Belisarius to a beneficiary of court connections. The court of Justinian was full of well-connected men. Most of them did not become military geniuses of historic proportions. Belisarius did what he did because of the quality of his own mind, the steadiness of his own character, and the particular combination of physical courage and analytical intelligence that the greatest commanders in history share. By his mid-20s, he was commanding Roman forces in the east, and he had already suffered the defeat at Thanuris, the 528 AD disaster where Roman forces were ambushed and routed in the open desert. Here is what matters about that defeat. Belisarius did not hide from it. He analyzed it. What had gone wrong? The Roman force had fought the kind of battle the Persians wanted, open, mobile, cavalry-dominated, and had predictably lost. The lesson was clear, if you had the courage to read it. Rome could not beat Persia by fighting the way Persia wanted to fight. The Persian military system was optimized for open-ground mobile warfare, and in that domain, they had every advantage: speed, numbers, range, psychological confidence. So Belisarius asked the question that defines the greatest military thinkers in every era. What would it take to fight a battle where those advantages don't apply? Not a siege. Fortresses were useful, but sitting inside walls was fundamentally passive. Justinian needed a field victory. The political and diplomatic situation demanded it. So, a field battle. But on terms that Belisarius chose. And here is where Belisarius's thinking becomes genuinely remarkable. Because the solution he arrived at was not to copy Persian tactics, not to match their cavalry with equivalent cavalry, which he didn't have enough of anyway, not to simply hope that better leadership would make up for structural disadvantages. His solution was to use the physical terrain itself as a weapon, to engineer the battlefield before the battle began. He chose the ground in front of Dara deliberately. The terrain outside the city gates was relatively flat, which might seem like a disadvantage for a smaller Roman force, since flat ground is where cavalry operates most effectively. But Belisarius saw something else in that flat ground. He saw a blank canvas, and he began to dig. The trench. This is the central innovation of Dara, and I want you to understand it in detail, because it is a tactical idea of genuine elegance that deserves to be treated with the respect it has earned from 15 centuries of military historians. Belisarius ordered his engineering corps to dig a long ditch across the front of his position, perpendicular to the road that led to the city gates. The ditch was wide enough that a horse could not comfortably jump it, several meters across, and deep enough to be a serious obstacle for cavalry moving at speed. This central section ran roughly east-west across the plain. Then he ordered perpendicular extensions. From the ends of the central ditch, shorter sections ran forward, north and south, toward the Persian lines. The result was a T-shaped or cross-shaped ditch system, a main trench running across the Roman front, with forward extensions at the flanks that prevented the Persians from simply riding around the ends of the obstacle. Think about what this accomplishes. In a single engineering decision, Belisarius has fundamentally constrained the Persian cavalry's options. The horse archers cannot ride along the Roman flanks, shooting freely. The forward extensions of the ditch block that movement. The Savaran heavy cavalry cannot simply charge across the whole front. The ditch forces them to attack at specific crossing points, which Belisarius can identify in advance and concentrate his defenses against. He has taken the primary weapons system of his enemy, mobile cavalry, and used a shovel and some dirt to neuter it. But the trench is only part of the solution. The other part is what Belisarius does with his own forces. Because his formation is equally innovative, equally counterintuitive, equally brilliant. He places his infantry in the center, the conventional position. But he keeps them back, close to the walls of Dara, behind the trench. They are the anchor, the defensive foundation that gives the whole formation stability. They are not, however, the decisive element. They hold. They do not advance. The decisive elements are his cavalry. And here is the arrangement that I want you to picture very clearly, because it is the mechanism of the trap. On each wing, both the left and the right, Belisarius positions cavalry units, but not in the conventional formation, where cavalry stands at the end of the line and protects the flanks by charging anything that threatens. Instead, he arranges these cavalry units in two staggered lines each. A forward element and a deeper element, positioned slightly behind and inward from the forward element. And on the far edges, beyond even the cavalry units, he positions his most reliable, most capable riders in positions of concealment. His Hunnic allied cavalry on one wing, his Gothic allied cavalry on the other, out of immediate sight, behind whatever terrain features the desert offered, rises in the ground, the edges of the fortifications, the cover of the forward trench extensions. Waiting. His infantry could not charge. His cavalry in the center of the line could hold, but not pursue. His force was too small to match the Persian mass head-to-head across the whole front. All of this was true, and Perazes knew all of this was true. What Perazes did not know, what no one outside the Roman command knew, was what Belisarius intended to do with those concealed cavalry units when the Persians did what their tactical instincts told them to do. Let me also tell you about the men. The 25,000 soldiers behind that trench were a specific composite force. Roman heavy infantry, the foederati, armed with shield, spear, and sword. Bucellari, the elite personal cavalry who owed direct loyalty to Belisarius. Hunnic confederates from the Eurasian steppe, the finest horse archers in the world. And Gothic federates, heavy armored lancers who could trade blows with Savaran on equal terms if the engagement could be controlled. This was not a Roman army in the traditional sense. It was a carefully assembled combination of fighting skills, chosen because each element contributed something specific to Belisarius's plan. The army reflected the plan, and the plan reflected its author, methodical, innovative, and absolutely ruthless in its exploitation of every available advantage. What Procopius tells us Belisarius communicated to his officers was simple. The enemy was large, but not invincible. The ground had been prepared. If every soldier executed his role at the right moment, the Persian army, for all its size and history of victory, would destroy itself against a position built specifically for that purpose. He was asking them to trust a plan that had never been tried before. They trusted him. Now we need to talk about the day before the battle, because what happens on the eve of Dara is not just context, for it is the psychological trigger, the moment that transforms a confrontation into a commitment, that takes a manageable tension and ignites it into something that demands resolution. Procopius, our primary source for Dara, and Procopius was there, as Belisarius's personal secretary and eyewitness to much of what he describes, tells us that the two armies spent several days facing each other before the main engagement. There were preliminary skirmishes. There was an extended period of posturing and positioning that was standard practice in ancient warfare. Both sides gathering intelligence, probing for weaknesses, sizing up the opposition. During this preliminary period, the Persians sent a message. Not an arrow, not a patrol, a letter. Persian commanders, in the ancient tradition, were communicated with enemy commanders before large engagements, and the communication they sent to Belisarius was a masterpiece of deliberate psychological pressure. They informed him, politely, formally, in the courtly language of Sassanid diplomatic correspondence, that he should prepare himself and his men for defeat. They expressed, in terms that were technically measured but unmistakably contemptuous, their confidence in the outcome. They noted their numerical superiority. They referenced the recent Roman defeats in this theater. They suggested, in effect, that what was about to happen was not truly a battle, but a conclusion to a contest that had already been decided. And they told him something else, something specific and personal. They told him that they had already prepared his bath. This is not a metaphor. In Persian tradition, and a public bath was prepared for a conquered enemy commander after his defeat, part of the ceremony of subjugation, an act simultaneously humiliating and practical. The public announcement that a man was now a prisoner and would be cleansed of his defeat before being presented to the victor. They were telling Belisarius, before the battle had been fought, that they already knew how it would end and had made arrangements for what would follow. Think about what you do with that. You are 25 years old. You are commanding an outnumbered army in desert heat against the finest military machine in the ancient world, and they are telling you, in writing, that your bath is ready. You could rage, you could despair, you could let it eat at you through the long hours of the night before battle. Like let the words work their way into the cracks of your confidence and widen them. Or you could do what Belisarius did. He wrote back. His reply, also preserved by Procopius, was calm, measured. The letter of a man who had decided to let the battlefield answer what words could not. He acknowledged the disparity in numbers. He simply stated that he intended to meet them in the field, and that the field would decide whose preparations had been accurate. And then he turned to his troops and did something great commanders always do. He used the insult. He took the contempt directed at him and transformed it into fuel. Not rage. Rage is unfocused. Rage breaks formations. Something more controlled and more dangerous. Pride. Focused, channeled, disciplined pride. He told his men what the Persians had said. He let them sit with it. And then he told them that every decision they made tomorrow, every step, every arrow, every charge at precisely the right moment, was their answer to the men who had already drawn their bath. The army that went to sleep that night was not a frightened force, facing an overwhelming enemy. It was a force that had been given something to prove. That distinction matters more than numbers. On the Persian side, Perozes received his intelligence about the Roman dispositions, the trench, the unusual formation. He was not alarmed. He had fought Romans before. He had a plan that accounted for standard Roman approaches, and he had confidence in his army's ability to execute it. He assigned Bearsmanus command of the left-wing cavalry, distributed his forces in the standard combined arms configuration, and went to sleep expecting victory. And he did not know, could not know, that the Roman flanks were not the weakest point, but the location of Belisarius's killing blow. The trap was set. Now all that remained was to wait for the Persians to walk into it. Let's talk about the battle itself. And I mean really talk about it, mechanically, geometrically, with the clarity that lets you see the tactical picture the way a commander sees it, from above and from inside simultaneously. Because the Battle of Dara is not just a story, it is a textbook. And I want you to understand every word of it. The morning of the battle, June 530 AD, the exact date uncertain but the summer heat beyond dispute. The sun already brutal by mid-morning, the desert air carrying the smell of dust and horse sweat and metal. The Persian army deployed across the plain facing the Roman position. for their line was longer than the Roman line, inevitably given the numerical difference, and they were confident that this length would allow them to outflank the Roman wings and encircle the smaller force. The terrain was approximately flat, but not perfectly so. There were gentle rises and small depressions in the ground that a careful observer would note, that Belisarius had noted, and that would factor into what came later. The walls of Dara rose behind the Roman position, close enough that soldiers who broke could retreat inside, which was both a comfort and a potential problem, since troops who know they have an easy escape route sometimes use it at the wrong moment. Now, the formation. Belisarius placed his Roman and Byzantine infantry in the center, directly behind the main east-west trench. But these troops were not going to be the decisive element of the battle, and their orders reflected that, hold the line, maintain formation, do not be drawn out. They were the anchor. On the wings, both left and right, he placed mixed cavalry formations. Each wing had a forward element of cavalry positioned just behind the perpendicular trench extensions. And behind the forward cavalry on each wing, he placed a second cavalry line. Here is the tactical key that I want you to hold clearly. The forward cavalry on each wing was positioned not to charge the enemy, but to receive the Persian cavalry charge and, crucially, to yield, to give ground deliberately, slowly, in a controlled way, drawing the Persian cavalry forward and inward, away from the open flanks, into the zone where the perpendicular trenches constrained their maneuver. And this is what modern military analysts call a defeat in detail trap. You do not try to hold everywhere. You allow a controlled collapse in a specific sector, which draws the enemy into a position where they are surrounded on multiple sides and can no longer maneuver freely. And the concealed cavalry, the Huns on one wing, the Goths on the other, were positioned to close the box. Now, let's trace the battle from the Persian perspective, because that is where the trap looks like a straight line forward. Persians began with his standard combined arms approach. First, the horse archers, thousands of them, advanced toward the Roman position and began their work. This was the standard Persian opening. Suppress the enemy formation with sustained arrow fire, disrupt its organization to create the kind of chaos that the following cavalry charge could exploit. Against a normal Roman formation on open ground, this worked. The archers fired, and the legions had to hunker under their shields, unable to advance, unable to respond effectively, their formation slowly degrading under the attrition of casualties and disorder. Against Belisarius's formation at Dara, it was different. The Roman infantry, behind the trench, were not exposed to direct cavalry pressure. They could hold their formation under arrow fire because the trench prevented the immediate follow-up charge that normally turned arrow-induced disorder into catastrophic rout. The trench bought them time. Not comfort, not safety, but time. Time to hold together, to absorb the fire, to wait. On the wings, however, the initial Persian cavalry pressure was more effective. The Savaran and their lighter supporting cavalry pushed forward against the Roman wing cavalry, and the Roman cavalry began to give ground. Deliberately. But it looked like pressure succeeding, which is exactly what Belisarius needed it to look like. Think about that. He needed his own men to look like they were losing. Imagine the discipline that requires. Imagine being a Byzantine cavalryman on the left wing, trained your whole life to fight, to hold, to charge when the moment comes, and instead, your orders are to give ground slowly, to fall back in controlled fashion, to make the Persians feel they are winning, while you guide them into a box you cannot see the edges of. The professionalism that demands is extraordinary. The Persian cavalry on both wings pressed forward. Or they advanced past the ends of the perpendicular trenches, or at least they tried to. The perpendicular trench extensions constrained them, forced the advancing Persian cavalry inward, channeled it toward the center of the Roman position, rather than allowing it to sweep freely around the flanks. And as the Persian cavalry pushed forward and inward, driving the retreating Roman wing cavalry ahead of them, something changed in their geometry. They were no longer spread across the open plain. They were inside a corridor, bounded on one side by the main trench, on another side by the perpendicular trench extensions, and on the third and fourth sides by Roman cavalry that was now no longer retreating, because Belisarius had given the signal. What the moment of the signal is one of those pivotal instants in military history that is almost impossible to recreate in imagination, but impossible not to try. Someone, a staff officer, a trumpeter, a rider, carried the order from Belisarius to the concealed cavalry units at the far flanks, and the Hunnic cavalry on one side and the Gothic cavalry on the other, which had been sitting motionless and invisible since the battle began to move. Not forward, not directly toward the Persian front. Inward. They moved inward and forward simultaneously, curving around the Persian cavalry that had advanced past them, closing behind it, cutting off its retreat. At the same time, the Roman forward cavalry on both wings, which had been giving ground, stopped giving ground. They turned, and they charged. The Persian cavalry that had advanced so confidently was now inside a box with walls on multiple sides, the trench behind them, the charging Roman forward cavalry in front of them, the Hunnic and Gothic cavalry closing from the flanks. There was nowhere to go that was not occupied by something trying to kill you. Let that sink in. 50,000 Persian soldiers, the finest combined arms army of the ancient world, had been outnumbered on the flanks by a force that appeared to be retreating, and now found itself trapped. Now here is the thing about overconfidence in a military context, because it is the psychological mechanism that made Dara possible, and one that recurs across military history with near clockwork regularity. Overconfidence does not feel like overconfidence from the inside. You feel the warm or solid reassurance of your own track record. You feel every previous success confirming that your current approach is sound. You feel the legitimacy of a tactical system validated by battle after battle, decade after decade, against opponents of every description. Perazes was not a fool. He was a professional. But he was a professional with too much evidence of his own success and too little imagination for the specific shape of the problem Belisarius had built for him. The trench, when his scouts reported it, was an obstacle, not a revelation. Roman armies had used field fortifications before. Defensive ditches were not a novel concept. What Perazes failed to understand was that this trench was not a defensive measure. It was the frame of a killing ground. It was not built to stop his army from advancing. It was built to control the geometry of that advance, so that the Persian cavalry arrived, at the end of its forward movement, in precisely the position Belisarius needed it. He sent his cavalry forward. The Roman wing cavalry fell back. He pressed harder. The Romans continued to give ground. He read this as the engagement developing favorably. Enemy forces unable to hold, envelopment proceeding as planned. And in the moment when he should have paused, when he should have asked why the retreating Roman cavalry was retreating in such orderly, controlled fashion rather than rooting, his experienced professional instincts told him what they always said in similar situations: press the advantage. Perazes pressed, and as his cavalry advanced past the perpendicular trenches into the zone where they no longer had flank protection, where the concealed Byzantine cavalry began to move. Think about the moment when the first Persian cavalryman on the wing realized what was happening. Riding forward. The retreating enemy just ahead, close enough to see the armor on their backs. And then, from the direction that his mind had already categorized as secured flank, cavalry. Hundreds of men, moving fast, moving inward, crossing directly behind him, cutting off the path back to the Persian lines. The tactical picture inverts in a fraction of a second. You are not pursuing a retreating enemy. You are trapped. The trench is behind you. The Roman cavalry ahead has stopped retreating and started charging. The flanking force is already between you and your own lines. There is no good direction, and in that confusion, tactical, cognitive, or psychological, with threats on multiple sides and no clear escape route, the Persian cavalry on the wings began to break. It begins on the right. The Persian right-wing cavalry, the force that had pressed hardest, advanced deepest, committed most fully to the attack, is the first to feel the box close. The Hunnic cavalry materializes from the cover of the forward terrain and drives in from the flank at full gallop. The Byzantine forward cavalry, which had been giving ground for the last hour, wheels and charges. The two converging forces hit the Persian right wing like the two jaws of a vice. The Persian cavalry on the right breaks, not slowly, not in stages. It breaks the way formations in that specific kind of confusion break. Suddenly, completely, men making individual decisions to flee rather than collective decisions to hold, or the unit cohesion that held them together as a fighting force evaporating in seconds. The rout spreads, it cascades. In ancient battle, in any battle, but especially in ancient battle, where the primary communications technology is a human voice carrying 10 feet in the noise and chaos, a rout in one sector spreads psychologically through adjacent units with terrifying speed. The soldiers on the Persian left who see the right wing breaking do not need an officer to explain the tactical situation to them. They see men running, men who were, minutes ago, advancing, men who are now screaming, riding for their lives, throwing down equipment to go faster. The message that carries is simple and devastating. Something has gone catastrophically wrong. The Persian left wing, commanded by Belisarius, attempts to hold. Belisarius is an experienced officer. He recognizes what is happening on the right. He tries to stabilize his own unit, to hold the left together while the right wing rout is contained. This is the correct response. This is exactly what a professional commander should do. Belisarius will not give him the time to do it. The Byzantine cavalry on the left wing charges, full speed, into the Persian left that is already trying to reorganize rather than fight. The timing is precise. Too early, and Belisarius has the cohesion to receive the charge and fight it off. Too late, the Persian left stabilizes, and momentum is lost. The charge hits, Belisarius dies in the fighting, when a commander dies in a battle already going wrong. The psychological effect on his troops is not just the loss of one officer's skill. It is the removal of the point around which resistance was organizing. The Persian left wing breaks, both wings now in full rout. The Persian cavalry, the decisive arm, the force that had won every major engagement in this theater for a generation, is fleeing, not retreating, fleeing. Thousands of men riding east as fast as their horses carry them, pursued by Byzantine cavalry cutting down stragglers. The Persian infantry in the center sees this. Think about what that vision does to infantry, who believed the battle was going well, who are now watching both wings of their cavalry, the force protecting their flanks, disappear into clouds of dust and screaming horses. The infantry falters. Perazes recognizes the battle is over. The tactical situation has inverted so completely, so rapidly, that there is no possibility of recovery. Or he orders withdrawal. The withdrawal, because Persian infantry are professionals and do not simply dissolve, is more organized than the cavalry rout. The infantry falls back in reasonable order, protecting itself, moving east and away from the Roman position. But it is a withdrawal from a battle they have lost. The question of whether to call it a retreat or a rout is purely semantic at this point. The outcome is identical. The Battle of Dara is over in a single day. The Persian losses. The numbers, as always with ancient sources, are difficult to pin down with precision. Procopius claims 8,000 Persian dead. Modern historians generally consider this plausible at the higher end. The losses from the cavalry engagement, the pursuit, and the infantry withdrawal combined could reasonably reach that figure. But the Roman losses were significantly lower, perhaps a few hundred dead, with the careful defensive positioning and the controlled nature of the trap, meaning that Roman soldiers were mostly fighting from positions of local advantage, rather than exposed to the kind of attrition that a head-on engagement would have produced. The pursuit carries Byzantine cavalry east for some distance, but Belisarius, and this is a mark of his tactical maturity, his understanding that overextended pursuit can convert victory into catastrophe, does not allow the chase to continue indefinitely. He pulls his cavalry back before they exhaust themselves and their horses in a desert they do not control. He secures the battlefield. He counts his men. He is still 25 years old. And he has just done something that had not been done by a Roman commander in this theater in a generation. He has beaten Persia in open battle, on ground of his own choosing, with a smaller force, against a genuinely superior military system. By the application of a tactical concept so carefully planned and so precisely executed that the enemy never understood what was happening to them until the box had already closed. Stand in that dust for a moment. Feel the heat of the afternoon sun, the smell of blood and horse and sand, the distant sound of the Persian rout fading east, the walls of Dara still standing behind you, every soldier around you alive, more of them alive than anyone had any right to expect when the sun rose this morning. Let that sink in. Now, let's talk about what Dara actually means. Not just for the soldiers who fought it, not just for Belisarius and Perazes and Justinian, but for the long arc of history that this single afternoon bends. Kavad I, the Persian king who had ordered this campaign, was old, in his early 70s, and the defeat at Dara was a significant blow. Not catastrophic in absolute military terms, but significant enough to complicate Persian strategic planning and Kavad's political standing. The Savaran nobility, who had been routed at Dara, expected victories. Kavad launched another campaign in 531 AD, the Battle of Callinicum on the Euphrates, where a Roman force under Belisarius suffered a tactical defeat. But even at Callinicum, Belisarius's force was not destroyed, and the strategic situation remained far better than before Dara. Kavad died in September of 531 AD. He was replaced by his son, the Khosrau I, who would prove to be one of the most capable rulers in Persian history. Khosrau looked at the mixed results of the recent campaigns, at the internal Persian need for reform, and negotiated peace. The eternal peace of 532 AD. Not eternal, no peace between these empires ever was, but real, and it bought Justinian something invaluable. Freedom. Freedom to look west. Within 2 years of Dara, Belisarius was in North Africa, destroying the Vandal kingdom in barely a year. Within 5 years, he was in Italy, fighting to reclaim the western heartland of Rome itself. None of that happens without Dara. The eternal peace of 532 AD is not achieved without the military reality Dara established. The reality that Rome had a commander capable of beating Persia in the field, or that further Persian aggression would not produce the easy victories the previous decade had normalized. Dara makes Belisarius's western campaigns possible. Those campaigns reshape the map of the Mediterranean world, and that map, shaped in the 6th century, influences, in ways both direct and complex, the world that eventually produces medieval Europe, the Renaissance, the legal traditions of the modern West. This is how history works. A battle on a dusty Syrian plain in June of 530 AD matters to someone watching this in the 21st century because the chains of consequence are long and real, even when we cannot trace every link. Now let's talk about Belisarius himself. For because the arc of what follows tells us something profound about the relationship between military genius and the political systems that both produce and constrain it. He went on to achieve victories that rank among the most extraordinary in military history. North Africa, in 533 to 534 AD, conquered in barely a year. Italy captured. Rome restored to Byzantine control for the first time in decades. These achievements place Belisarius in the company of history's greatest commanders, and scholars debate whether anyone from Caesar to Napoleon equals the quality of his generalship across the full scope of his career. And yet, Justinian never fully trusted him. How could he? A commander of Belisarius's talent, loyalty, and fame was an inherently destabilizing political presence in a system where the emperor's authority was absolute, and any rival center of power, even a loyal one, was a potential threat. Belisarius was recalled from campaigns at inopportune moments, given inadequate forces, subjected to investigations and accusations, and the Byzantine specialty of destroying effective men through administrative persecution rather than direct confrontation. He died in 565 AD, the same year as Justinian, still honored, still wealthy, but not in full possession of the legacy his accomplishments deserved. History had to wait until it could speak for itself. Now, 15 centuries later, it can. Think about what Belisarius represents. Not just as a commander, though as a commander he belongs in any serious conversation about the greatest military minds in human history, but as a human being, navigating the gap between what he could achieve on the battlefield and what the political system would allow him to achieve off of it. He solved tactical problems of extraordinary complexity with elegance and precision. He could not always solve the problem of power, of patronage, of the deep suspicion that genius and ambition and popularity generate in systems built around autocratic authority. That gap between what a person is capable of and what the system surrounding them permits is one of the oldest and most painful themes in human experience. It is not unique to Belisarius, but in Belisarius it is rendered with particular clarity. Because the contrast between the battlefield and the court is so stark, because the quality of what he did at Dara, and in North Africa, and in Italy, is so unambiguous, so well documented, so undeniable. He was, by every reasonable assessment, one of the most gifted military minds in human history. He was used, constrained, and ultimately diminished by a system that simultaneously needed him and feared what he represented. And Dara, that first great victory, that audacious, elegant, perfectly executed trap, was the moment when all of that was still ahead of him. When a 25-year-old with a shovel and a tactical idea changed the geometry of an empire's strategic situation in a single day. What does that teach us? It teaches us that numbers are not destiny, or that the side with more soldiers and more historical momentum does not automatically win. That a sufficiently intelligent assessment of the actual tactical problem, stripped of inherited assumptions, stripped of conventional doctrine, can produce solutions that make numerical superiority irrelevant. It teaches us that preparation is not just logistics. Belisarius did not dig that trench the morning of the battle. He designed the battlefield days before the engagement. He thought about the geometry of what the Persians would do, identified the specific mechanism that would generate their defeat, and built that mechanism into the ground before anyone fired an arrow. Preparation, in the deepest military sense, is the construction of conditions under which your plan will work. It teaches us about patience, and Roman cavalry giving ground deliberately, controlled, apparently losing, for an hour before the trap closed. That is a deeply unnatural instinct, one that has been trained against by everything in your military culture. Executing it requires absolute trust in the plan and in the commander who designed it. Trust earned not by rhetoric, but by demonstrated intelligence. And it teaches us that the moment when your enemy feels most confident, most certain, most committed to their course of action, is often the moment of their greatest vulnerability. Not because confidence is always wrong, but because confidence produces commitment, and commitment in a direction that your trap is designed to exploit is the precondition for the trap to close. The Perazes was doing what good commanders do, pressing the advantage when the enemy appears to be retreating. He just didn't know the retreat was the plan. The battle outside the walls of Dara ended in one afternoon. The sun that had hammered down on 50,000 Persian soldiers in the morning was setting on a Persian rout by evening. The city of Dara stood. The Roman eastern frontier held. Belisarius had his victory. And in Constantinople, when the dispatch arrived, imagine Justinian reading it. That extraordinary, relentless man who slept 4 hours a night and personally supervised the governance of the largest empire on earth, reading the words that told him his 25-year-old general had done what no Roman commander had managed in a generation. Something shifted in the empire's understanding of what was possible. Not just in the east, in the west, in the spaces between the former Roman provinces that were now Germanic kingdoms, in the cities that still called themselves Roman, in the populations who still remembered what Roman governance had felt like, and wondered if it would ever return. Something shifted, because a young man in the dust of the Syrian desert had picked up a shovel and redrawn the rules of the game, had looked at the problem that had defeated every predecessor and found the specific geometric solution that made the problem solvable, had trusted an idea that had never been tested in circumstances where the cost of being wrong was everything, and had been right. That is the story of Dara. That is why it matters. Not just as a battle, not just as a moment in the Roman-Persian conflict that stretched across centuries, but as an example, a specific, documented, undeniable example of what human intelligence at its best can accomplish against odds that were supposed to be overwhelming. What do you think? Does Belisarius belong in the conversation about history's greatest commanders? Was the Battle of Dara a lucky break, or the product of genuine tactical genius, or both, as most great moments in history tend to be? Drop your answer in the comments. I am genuinely curious what you think, and I read every response. And if this is the kind of history that makes you feel something, that reminds you why the study of the past is not an academic exercise, but a deeply human necessity, then subscribe, because there is much more where this came from. Every week we go back into the places where civilization was decided, or where the future hung on the decisions of specific human beings in specific moments of almost unbearable pressure. And we try to understand not just what happened, but why it matters. Because it does matter. All of it. Even a trench in the desert, 15 centuries ago, dug by the hands of soldiers who had been told that their bath was already prepared by the enemy waiting across the plain. They dug anyway, and history remembers them for it.